the outpouring of sympathy and support continues for the family of Tyre Nichols.
Yeah, the 29-year-old father and FedEx worker was brutally beaten by Memphis cops on January 7th following a traffic stop, and he died just days later in the hospital from his injuries. His funeral is scheduled for tomorrow.
A verified GoFundMe campaign started in memory of Tyre has raised over $1.2 million. The number is steadily climbing. This as we learn more about the people who are being held accountable for his death. Memphis police confirmed Monday 2 more officers were relieved of duty for their participation in the incident, but they have not yet been charged.
In addition, the Memphis Fire Department terminated 3 employees for violating numerous MFD policies and protocols in their response to Tyre. Investigators say Lieutenant Michelle Whitaker, Robert Long, and Jamichael Sandridge failed to make an adequate assessment of the patient when they arrived on the scene. Now, for some more perspective on the progress of the case and the impact of this case that it's having on the Black community, we're joined now by Kalfani Ture, a former police officer who is now an assistant professor of African American Studies at Mount St. Mary University. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Memphis Police announced that a 6th officer and a 7th officer are now suspended. As a former policeman, what would you say about the speed of this investigation, and rather the speed of making some action, taking some action, rather than going through the whole process of the investigation first?
Sure. So certainly they announced at least one of the officers' name is Preston Hemphill. And I think we all are sort of enthralled, if not pleased, by the swift action taken both by the chief of police and the district attorney. But this was patently obvious. The body footage was there, and I agree with most who say this may serve as a template for the type of response that should occur to obvious misconduct from a police officer.
So we learned more about the 3 EMTs who were also involved because of their lack of help once they got to the scene. Investigators say the lieutenant never even got out of the truck. So from your knowledge as a policeman, what is the standard procedure when EMTs meet police officers at a scene? I mean, how quickly are they addressing a person who may be on the ground, or in this case, he was kind of sat up against a car?
Absolutely. So this is a tricky situation.
Okay.
Long, Sandridge, and Whitaker had the duty to assess, and they also had the duty to render medical aid, which they didn't do, and that's sort of obvious. But in these types of situations, I think the EMTs know where the bones are buried. They've seen this unit in action before, and their approach may have very well been, this is, in fact, a crime scene. Not a crime scene involving the apprehension of a criminal, but a crime scene involving rogue police officers who engaged in an act of violence. And so I think part of the calculus, and I'm not trying to make a defense for them, part of their calculus was, man, we don't want any involvement here. But that doesn't prohibit them to render aid and proper assessment, which they failed to do. In fact, the lieutenant didn't even get out of the car with these junior EMS workers, one of 2.5 years, the other of 3 years, which is striking that all of these professionals have been on this force for such a small amount of time, and there clearly is no supervision.
It is striking, and you always think, well, I can't believe people are going to do it, and then they keep doing it over and over again, making these really terrible errors. And you've watched this video, I imagine, several times since its release. It's very hard to watch, but where did the confrontation between the officers and Tyre kind of take that turn?
Well, first, we need to stop referring to this as a traffic stop, in a sense that there was some legal justification for the stop. There was no probable cause for the stop. And I think the second thing is when we sort of begin to analyze this properly, we will disabuse ourselves of what I call the Memphis lullaby. And that is, what did the chief of police know, and when did she know it? She obviously knew about the extrajudicial activities of this crime suppression unit. And did she allow it to proceed as part of a Faustian bargain? That is, they needed to bring crime rates down. They needed to remove guns off the street. The homicide rates for the past couple of years was above 300. And so there was a political pressure. get these numbers down. And so she tolerated this group in order that this might, in fact, be the outcome. But here it wasn't. And it gave license to a culture of policing that doesn't represent the best of us.
So you're a professor of African American studies, and I know you've probably seen this conversation kind of unfold over the weekend. With the fact that the 5 policemen that have been charged so far and fired so far, they're black and are responsible for this man's death, what impact is that having in black and brown communities in Memphis and other cities? You know, because we have seen in the past where the police officers might have been white and the victim is black, and we have seen, you know, okay, well, we need to wait for an investigation. We need to wait for X, Y, and Z. In this case, that was not the case. What impact is that having, though, when it comes to conversations within the black and brown community?
Yeah, it's absolutely complicated because I think the framing of police brutality has always been that of white officers committing these sort of sadistic acts. And so I think in part, people are having a difficult time processing this in a more public arena. But I'll tell you something that I've heard from African Americans and also Latinos. There's an equal or greater fear of African American officers because of this type of violence. In other words, that the Black Lives Matter campaign for social justice would have benefited from clearly stating that it doesn't matter if the officer is white, black, brown, or other. It is the police officer and policing itself that is a problem. And so I think there's a difficulty here in processing this because the chief is black, because it's a black chocolate city, if you will. And these officers obviously are black. I will say one thing. I believe that Preston Hemphill needs to be prosecuted in party. He needs to receive the same charges because he certainly demonstrated the same frame of mind, and he helped to sort of, he was part and parcel of this crime in action. And so it might be strategic not to acknowledge that he was also under investigation, because again, to put a white face on this may have led to the type of eruptions that we typically see after these incidents.
And really quickly, in our interviews that we've had, you know, just in the last couple of days or so, you know, people have said, okay, well, this is a cultural issue within police departments, right? And, you know, there can only be so much training, so much, you know, de-escalation tactics and techniques taught. But given your experience, how difficult is it going to be to address the cultural aspect in a police department when there is no test, there is no, I mean, you can't really necessarily ask somebody, hey, are you racist? Or, hey, how do you feel about black people? You know, like, how do you even begin to address that situation culturally?
Well, I think the important question, as you're asking, where do we go forward from here?
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that the Memphis Police Department needs not just this unit disbanded, but the entire department needs to be disbanded. And this has actually happened elsewhere. Camden, New Jersey, for example, rid itself of its entire police department. Well, what does this achieve? It allows to get around police unions who often fight for or fight against reform, right? So this police department has to be made anew or recreated, if you will, right? Obviously, according to a more human service model. But I also think we need to nationalize policing because there are no national standards. And we might, you know, Memphis implemented a lot of reforms, but maybe Chattanooga has flouted those reforms. So there is this sort of cherry picking on what we want to do to appear progressive in response to the George Floyd murder. But we need a national model and not a national commission.
That is a really interesting point. All right, Khalfani Touré, former police officer and assistant professor for Mount St. Mary, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.